Thank you, Jane. We've had a couple of great sessions this morning, but I have no doubt that the upcoming session on spatial epidemic modelling is going to be the most exciting session of all. We've got 3 20-minute presentations coming up, but before that, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Michael Batty. He's Bartlett Professor of Planning at University College London, also Chair of the Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis there, and a Turing Fellow and Project Leader at the Alan Turing Institute. He's going to give us a quick introduction to the session. So over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks very much, Will. Let me, always the dangerous moment here, let me share my screen because I've got about 4 or 5 slides basically which will introduce it. So here I go. Okay. Now I think you should be able to see the PowerPoint. Let me put it into full presentation mode. Okay, assuming everybody can see it, let me say what we're going to do this afternoon. A slight change in scale, I think. To some extent, we've mixed the various talks in terms of scale, but we are getting slightly finer scale this afternoon and certainly tomorrow morning as well, in a sense. And the area of RAMP, the rapid assistance for pandemic modeling, the area of RAMP that really relates to the contributions we have is referred to as human dynamics in small spaces. As Mike Cates originally initially told us this morning, RAMP has a series of tasks, basically, of which at least 3 are relevant to what we're talking about today, although in fact only 2 of them will be are being talked really about today. In that sense, the 3 tasks involved that are relevant to RAMP are urban analytics, which we've already seen quite a bit of with respect to Mark Birkin, and well, Gavin Shaddick basically talked about the urban analytics. A second task is environmental and aerosol transmission. There has been a Newton Gateway meeting such as this one. We're on task 7, environmental and aerosol transmission. That's led by Paul Linden from Cambridge and Chris Payne from Imperial. And the one that we've not quite said much about at the moment, but we will say a lot more about in the next, in this afternoon session, and then certainly tomorrow, is human dynamics in small spaces. So it's changing the scale really from aggregate to disaggregate to some extent, from macro to micro, although we've had quite a lot of thinking about micro behavior so far. So these are our tasks in that sense. I like to think of them as informing each other in this particular way, that the movement and location at metro scales, we saw this morning a number of presentations really looking at what I would call the urban metropolitan scale to some extent, or the I'm thinking of urban as being covering the whole country in some senses, but working with units such as middle layer super output areas, and so on, a number of models related to that, but also it was pushing down towards the micro, but nevertheless movement and location at those scales, and then down to movement at a much finer scale, but the finer scale of buildings really in that sense, or complexes of buildings like shopping centres, rail stations and so on. And that's what the human dynamics in small spaces stuff is all about. And then, of course, down into what Paul Linden and Chris Payne have been organising, which is the transmission at meter and much finer scales in this particular context. And there are some conundrums and difficulties of moving between scales in this sense and changing resolution from aggregates, aerial aggregates to agents through to, as Ed Gallia told us this morning, to the actual transmission itself in terms of aerosol transmission. Okay, so just to simply summarize that, this is what Gavin talked about this morning, which was the model for Devon. Clearly Frank and also Glenn, of course, talked about similar sorts of models in some senses. This is what we're talking about the beginning, kicking off this afternoon, which is down at the level of supermarkets. And then in terms of aerosol transmission, all of the work that Paul and Chris have been doing really relate to that. Now, I just want to say one more thing before I actually sort of finish and hand over to our first presenter. We'll be talking about at the level of supermarkets to begin with in this sense, but these are the groups that were originally organized by RAMP under the title Human Dynamics in Small Spaces. So we had Network Rail, Sainsbury's, and those in bold on this slide are presenting at this Newton workshop either today or tomorrow. So you've seen the work from Fred and Jerry in that sense, from Arup, etc. The EpiSim, TransSim type, the NatSim type model. Ordnance Survey, again, a similar model will be talked about tomorrow in that sense. And we'll be kicking off with the Oxford Tesco model in a moment. Connected Places, Catapult, BAE Systems, and then Ed Gallia will talk tomorrow. He's from the Fire Safety Group, of course, Centre for Numerical Modelling at the University of Greenwich. And then we had a number of other people who, other groups who were involved. And these were from our original RAMP volunteers, basically. And of course, there are many other examples, of course, that we could include in this sense, but our focus in terms of selection has been largely, in fact, through the lens of RAMP and who volunteered initially about a year or so ago. Okay, let me tell you what's happening this afternoon. You probably already know. I'll finish in 1 minute. And then Fabian Ying with Niamh O'Clery. I don't think Niamh is here, but Fabian Ying, who works for G Research. When they were at Oxford, they developed this supermarket model, and there are a couple of interesting papers on that, one in Physical Review E, I think, the original paper before the pandemic, and then a more recent one in Plus One, I think, or Scientific Reports, but you could be able to Google those with Fabian and get that. And then we've got a contribution from Turing, Hadrian Salat, Anna Sanchetta, Manluo, and Fernando Benitez, all newcomers to Turing who are working on extending the urban analytics model. I've not seen any work from that yet, so I'll look at that with interest as it comes up. And then we have James Thompson, who is another Turing fellow, who is going to talk about his work on interventions from lockdown to vaccinations. One of the features this afternoon, in fact, indeed one of the features of the whole conference really is that many people are affiliated to Turing in some sense. All of those this afternoon are affiliated in this way. So at that point, I want to finish and hand over to Fabian. So let me stop sharing the screen. Okay, so stopped at that point.